Okay, this video is on calculating expected frequency. You can't really do it unless you've watched the previous video, which is experimental probability formula. Now in that video, you'll remember we did an experiment with these disks. We kept pulling one out and looking at it, pulling one out and looking at it. We created a relative frequency table. You see lots of white disks came out and not very many red disks at all. We did an experimental probability formula and found that the probability of pulling out a red disk is 14.71%. And that's where we start this video here. Now, let's say I was to reach into that box like 500 times. The question is, how many times would I pull out a red disk? So that's what this is about. We're calculating the expected frequency, the expected number of times that a particular event would happen. Okay, so for that, we're going to need our expected frequency formula. So here we have in red our expected frequency formula. The expected frequency is equal to the experimental frequency, or the experimental probability, same thing, times the number of trials. Let's not confuse things. Let's make it experimental probability. Okay, so the expected frequency is equal to experimental probability times the number of trials. So, the experimental probability, we already know because we've already done our first experiment, is 14.71%. Now, it's not going to work as a percentage. You're going to have to express it as a decimal. Remember, percentages and decimals, they're pretty much the same thing. So, let's call our experimental probability 0.1471. And then we need to multiply it by the number of trials. Now I said, how many red disks would I get if I did that experiment, that trial, 500 times? So the number of trials I'm going to do is 500. Okay, so the answer to my question, if I reached into this thing and pulled out a disk 500 times, what would I get? Let's take a look at the calculator. My calculator gives me an answer of 73.55. That means that if I reach into this bucket 500 times, I would expect to pull out a red disk 73.55 times. Now that doesn't make any sense because you can't pull out a disk 0.55 times. So I'll use my little wavy equal sign and say approximately, about, if I reached in there 500 times, I'd get about 74 red disks. Okay, lots covered here. In a previous video, we looked at what experimental probability was, and we did an experiment with our disks. This one's about predicting the future. If I do a certain number of trials, how many times will a particular thing happen? In this case, how many times will getting a red disk happen? Calculating expected frequency.